Hello and welcome, class. Here we are discussing Anne Bradstreet. All right, one of our many authors from, one of our many female authors, actually, I should say, from the 1600s and 1700s, or the 17th and 18th centuries. Here's a picture of Anne. You can see what she looks like. All right, obviously not a photo, but, drawing. Um, Okay, well, we have several links in the lecture, as you can see here, that you can learn more. If you want to learn more or see more of her poetry, you can even hear a story from NPR about Anne Bradstreet as America's first poet. Pretty exciting, and she was a woman. Yay! All right. Well, that means they're making great strides, right? Breaking into society. Not that there's anything bad about men or women, we're all equal right now, but at that time they weren't. So it's pretty exciting when you can see a female author become the first American poet. All right. So Anne Bradstreet lived from about 1612 to 1672 till about the age of 60. She probably died of tuberculosis, from which she suffered for some time. Okay, as did one of her daughters. A lot of people died from tuberculosis, especially, gosh, you're hearing a lot of them during later time periods even. It was also known as consumption. So if you ever hear somebody died of consumption, that meant tuberculosis. So this plagued people for a long time. Fortunately, in America nowadays, it's not really an illness we have to deal with, but they do still deal with it in other countries. But anyway, yeah, one of her daughters also directly preceded her in death from tuberculosis, and then Anne died. Although they were a wealthy family, Anne's family, the Dudleys, were also Puritan. So the whole family, including newlywed at the time, Anne and her husband Simon Bradstreet, decided to move to New England in search of religious freedom when Anne was only 18. Now, about Anne Bradstreet, Adrienne Rich. Remember, we read Adrienne Rich during week 1 of this course. Anyway, she has remarked about Anne to have written the first good poems in America while rearing 8 children, lying frequently sick, keeping house at the edge of the wilderness. What was to have managed a poet's range and extension within confines as severe as any American poet has confronted. Yeah, 8 kids on the edge of the wilderness, no modern conveniences, no intact government. Frequently she's sick, and yet she's writing poetry at the same time. Pretty amazing. And trying to manage a house, and presumably a farm. For our class, we read Bradstreet's own Prologue. That's what it's called. It is the prologue to the first collection of verse written in the New World, either by a man or a woman. The very first collection of verse. It was published in 1650. And the name of that verse is The 10th Muse Lately Sprung Up in America. And this prologue was the first piece of it. Anne Bradstreet's brother-in-law published this book allegedly without Anne's knowledge. Of course, every effort was made to make sure the public, who still predominantly eschewed women writers — eschewed means, tried to stay away from, looked down upon, discouraged. And their quest for anything beyond the domestic sphere was discouraged. The public thought that Anne was not trying to be a writer. Every effort was made to make people think that Anne was not trying to be a writer, but was rather a normal housewife who happened to write only in between, quote unquote. This is directly from Anne Bradstreet's writing. She wrote in between the work of a woman honored and esteemed where she lives for her exact diligence in her place and discreet manner of her family occasions, end quote. So that her writing would be viewed as, quote, again, this is directly quoting Anne Bradstreet's writing, quote, the fruit of some few hours curtailed from her sleep and other refreshments, unquote. So she wasn't taking away from any time that she should have been spending on her family or her home or her husband. She wants you to know that. Instead, she was just snatching time in her, what would have been her downtime, to rest and relax. Instead of resting and relaxing, she was writing verse. That's what she says. And maybe that's true, but maybe they want to make sure you thought that so that you would read her, right? You wouldn't be like, oh, we're not going to read her. She's not living righteously. She's not doing what she's supposed to be doing as a wife and a mother. Anyway, lines from Bradstreet's prologue itself evidence the pressures that society exerted on her to humble herself as a female before the superiority of male poets. And these are her lines again, lines 40 to 42 in the prologue. Quote, men can do best, and women know it well. Preeminence in all and each is yours. Yet grant some small acknowledgment of ours. Unquote. Lines 40 to 42 of the prologue. So she's saying, yeah, okay, I acknowledge your superiority, but give us a little bit of credit, okay? For a little bit of what we do. However, Bradstreet was obviously conflicted because in the same poem, she writes of the dilemma confronting many female writers at the time, that people will say she should be sewing instead of writing poetry, and that even if her poetry is good, no one would believe that a woman could write good poetry. So people would think she either stole the verse or happened to get lucky. So she writes about this in the prologue, as you can see, lines 25 through 30, quote, I am obnoxious to each carping tongue who says my hand of needle better fits. A poet's pen all scorn I should thus wrong. For such despite they cast on female wits, or for such despot they cast on female wits. If what I do prove well, it won't advance. They'll say it's stolen, or else it was by chance. So she's worried that people are going to say, oh, you should be sewing instead of writing. And even if she did get her stuff known, people would say, well, you know, it was she stole it from someone else. Somebody else really wrote it and she claimed it as her own and put her name on it. Or she just happened to get lucky. Kind of like, a monkey typing every so often. Like if a monkey typed forever, it would eventually, by the laws of chance, wind up with like writing a play of Shakespeare. Of course, that sounds ridiculous, right? So that's the kind of argument they're making, that like she just had to get lucky to be able to write all these poems that are kind of good, right? Anyway, that's the dilemma confronting these female writers at this time, and especially in Bradstreet. You see, she writes about it here. People think I should be sewing, but instead I want to write. People think, oh, a man must have written this, not you, or you just got lucky. So we'll see more of that as we move forward. But that is Anne Bradstreet, and I hope you enjoy her prologue. Thanks.